sounds funny to me. Is it all right? Pam, it's okay. I'm sorry about that. I just sounded tinny or something. Okay. One of the reasons we were doing these lectures during these weeks is that the law school is out, and it's probably easier to park out there, as some of you might have found. They're always thinking of these practical problems. I intend to try to set the part of the problem here and then look at Ghandi to see what insights Ghandi gives us on the question of power, and then make some applications of that, and then we hope to have time for questions and discussions. Another time I collected some statements just as randomly as you're walking around, you hear people use the word power. He's too powerful for me, and I feel intimidated when talking to him. I want to find out where the real power in this organization is so I can get some things accomplished. There's no doubt about it. Power does indeed corrupt. The powerless must be empowered so they can take charge of their lives. The superpowers are drifting towards confrontation. When I get into a power position, then I will be able to do more good. Power is frightening. I'm afraid I will misuse it. I love power. It makes me feel secure. Powerful nations have a responsibility to help weaker nations. Black power is the answer to our racial problems. More firepower will keep the Soviets off our shores. So I suppose if we reflected a bit on conversation, the word power comes up a lot. And yet I think it's often not well analyzed, or at least sort of lurks in the background. A lot of times people don't want to talk about power because it sounds sort of messy, and it's the kind of thing where we're getting our hands dirty, maybe, in a way. It suggests a certain aggressive posture, perhaps. And yet, what we find is in all of our relationships, all of our interactions, power is at work, whether we like it or not. It's every time human beings get together in relationships, marriage relationships, working relationships, there's power struggles going on. There's power is an important part of what is happening. The same way it goes with groups, with nations, and so on. When you use the word power, and I'll be doing it throughout these two lectures, I think of it as meaning the ability to influence others before their free will is operative. It's the ability to influence, to make a difference in other people's lives that affects them before they're able to sort of grab hold of it and say yes or no to it. Some people know the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. One of his big things, every place he looked around, and thus spoke Zarathustra, says, every place I see living creatures, there I see the will to power. So in the 19th and 20th century, many philosophers talked about that. Wanted to see us, that's almost our essence in a way, to the will to power, the will to self-realization, the will to self-actualization. So it's a very important category and one that we need to look at. Now, as I suggested, I've decided to divide up my material into two parts in these two lectures. The first is to deal with the problem of powerlessness, the fact that we don't feel as though we have power. And then next week, I want to deal with the way we use the power that we do have. Tonight, I'll use Ghandi to try to illumine that. Next week, Martin Luther King. So let's look at that question of powerlessness and how that affects us. Some people have said that, that's one of the great problems of the 20th century. It's very odd. We've got all this technology, and we got this advanced civilization and all this affluence, and yet many people feel powerless in the world today. Now, that's obviously true of poor people, who can't get things done, can't make things happen. But it also seems to be true of middle-class people, and even affluent people will talk about feeling powerless. Maybe we translate that into other words, the feeling of being helpless or not being able to make a difference in the world. The poet Auden speaks about the faceless others, and the sense of being faceless, of not counting, of being just a cog in a machine or a number in the bureaucracy. It makes it difficult to feel as though one is worthwhile or has something to contribute. Now let's look at that more carefully. That's sort of a generalized feeling, and I begin to see, can we identify with that in any way? And I'm sure if we tried, we could, ways we feel powerless in our relationships, our situations, and so on. Now I want to look at that in more detail here. First of all, let's think of ourselves. Well, some would say, well, part of my problem is that I can't control my passions. I'm taken over by my compulsions. I'm powerless in the face of alcohol, as Alcoholics Anonymous insisted people say. I'm powerless in the face of this. Other people say, well, I'm powerless to control this particular vice that's plagued me for all these years. I've tried over and over in various ways, and I just can't get a hold of it. Very often people in our society will feel like victims. That's one of the first things that we notice in therapy when we begin to deal with people. Do they feel like victims or not? And that's often the case. Like, I can't control this. Like, I can't deal with this external situation. It's too much for me. It takes me over. And then begin to play that out in various ways. I was dealing with a young lady not long ago in her 20s, and I said, you almost want to be a victim. You're acting like you're 12 years old. You want to revert to being a little girl, to be powerless. You want to be powerless in a way. Don't want to assume the kind of responsibilities and the mature outlook that the 22-year-old ought to achieve. So it's possible to feel powerlessness within ourselves. Impotency, a growing problem, growing sexual problem in our culture. To be impotent then is to feel as though one is not worthwhile, that one can't function, that one is a cipher, doesn't count in any way. So even when we begin to look within ourselves, we begin to see areas perhaps where we feel powerless to deal with whatever we are, with whatever forces are going on at work within us, whatever conflicts are there, the compulsions, the strong emotions, and so on. Then we begin to look at our relationships with others. And sometimes it's a matter of looking and saying, well, other people are more powerful than I am. They're more aggressive. If I'm in a group, I can't get a word in edgewise. That doesn't apply to me in that case. I was used as a general example. It's that I'm too timid. Other people overpower me. We find that sometimes in relationships, people will say, well, I argue with him, but I can't because he overpowers me. He's too good. He's a debater. He's too quick with language. He's facile. He's very articulate, and if I started to get into this sort of argument, I would be soon overwhelmed. Other people have higher social status. They make more money. They can throw their weight around. They've moved up the ladder, and therefore in relating to them, I feel small. I feel suddenly as though I have very little to offer. I get overwhelmed by these other people. We see this happening in marriage relationships, and so often, as we know it in our culture, it happens to women. So that women find out, well, my husband makes more money than I do. Even I am working outside the home, but whenever it's a time to move, where do we move? We go where he wants to go. Why? Because he can make more money. And therefore, the woman says, I feel powerless. I have nothing to say about it. I can just eventually tag along. And so we find this going on in marriages often, the conflict over money, where the real question, we know number one problem in marriage is, stress problems, is money. And an interesting thing is, it happens in families where they got a lot of money. It's not restricted to poor people. And what does that tell us? Well, the money is a symbol. It's got nothing to do with buying power. It's got everything to do with who controls it, who has the power to say how it's going to be spent in various ways. I can remember that in my own family. But I won't go into it because my mother is here. Here's the grocery money, Lillian. Make it do. So, money becomes a symbol of how the power relationships go on. And then we begin to see, again, thinking of our close relations, friendships, and so on, that very often we feel manipulated or controlled. It seems like it can happen in subtle ways. That the other person just knows how to, they got an agenda like you, so we interact with them, they got a program going here. They got some place they want to get to. And as we're going along, you realize it's not an open kind of situation, but ahead of time they knew where this was supposed to end up. Whether it's where we're going to travel or what we're going to do or whatever, there's a clear agenda, and they have their ways to figure out how to make this happen. We call that often manipulation, or in stronger forms to exploit other people. A vignette pops in my mind. A very good friend of mine, we're sitting there talking, and he said something that I thought was really neat, and I took out a piece of paper, and I wrote down what he said, and he got really mad. And I said, "What are you upset about?" And he says, "Well, it bugs me." Well, why? He says, "Well, I sort of felt used. I was using his ideas." Well, what we find out very often is we can be in a group or interacting and have no idea of how it's being perceived in terms of the power flow that's going on. And it becomes, I think, difficult to be attuned to all the ways that people are affected by whatever power we exert in a given situation. Then let me turn this to what I'll call the societal level. Well, today, we have a great sense of the nuclear threat. Many people feel powerless in the face of that. What can we do? We got these superpowers. They got these big weapons. We can lobby Congress, write letters, and so on. But those weapons are sitting out there, and what can we eventually do about it? And so people undergo what Robert J. Lifton has called psychic numbness. They withdraw then and say, I'm not going to think about the nuclear problem because there's really nothing that I'm able to do about it. A lot of us think of the bureaucracies in which we live along that line. The great sociologist Max Weber talked about the bureaucracies producing a sense of the iron cage. So in the modern world, people feel like they're caged in. There's no place to go, no room to maneuver. You can't go into McDonald's and say, well, I want some of this or some of that and negotiate about it. It all happens. You don't have choices about things. It's within a certain range that we have to function. So this happened with government bureaucracy. I suppose the tax situation now is where people feel I can't even read the form. I can't figure it out. I can't do my own taxes if I want to. Got to get someone to do them for me. It's too complicated. The bureaucracy has, again, created the iron cage. I can't get out of it in any way. Some people feel controlled by technology. People would like to live a simple life and find it hard to do. All the technological advances free us up in many ways, but other people feel as though, we're simply sort of run by these computers that we got. I always think again of the example of the guy that I lived in my place down at Bowling Green, a priest from out in Oregon, and he was at the university for, 3 years or so, and for 3 years he tried to get them to send his mail to him right across the street. And for 3 years, the mail went from the university out to Oregon and back to him. You can never change that in 3 years. Went to every office, talked to every person. Is there some way to do this? There never was. The mail always went like that. And then when we think of the societal problems, of course, the unemployment situation comes to our mind, where people really feel powerless, not to have a job, not to be worthwhile, not to be able to make a contribution, to use one's talents. That becomes one of the great difficulties. I correspond with a woman who writes me very often. She's a woman on welfare. And her letters are one statement after another, just long portrayals of powerlessness. She can't get anything done. She can't get a lawyer to answer her calls. She can't get the courts to do anything about getting the father of her 2 children to do anything about taking care of those kids. No matter where she turns, she can't make it happen. That's her dominant sense of life. I am powerless. I can't get out. I'm trapped. I'd like to move. I can't. I'm in this situation. I want to get a big brother for my sons. I can't find one. I've tried every place. Nothing. I can't make it happen. So in the societal situation, powerlessness is certainly a great part of it. And finally, in trying to analyze this, I would talk about a cosmic sense of powerlessness. This is when we remind that we don't control our own destiny, that we're sort of a victim of the fates. There's some gigantic process going on that we don't control. There's this large universe in which we find ourselves, and we're in a tiny speck on a tiny globe. And in the midst of all of this, we get to wonder, well, who are we? What do we have to do with any of it? Where do we fit in all of this? There's larger powers at work that we don't really control. Put in more theological terms, some people feel overwhelmed by the powerful God. That was the point of Jean-Paul Sartre, who said that, if you believe in God, then you can't be free. You lose all your power if you believe in God, because He's omnipotent, He runs everything, and we end up being puppets or automatons. And that's the feeling that many people have. Many people suffer the powerlessness that goes with guilt. In the face of this great God, I only can feel small and insignificant and mostly guilty. And that guilt then paralyzes me, and I'm not able to function as I might like. Now, that's an attempt to draw us all in. There's got to be some way in which this problem of powerlessness touches us. In which we know the truth of what Nietzsche said, that everybody has a will to power, to break out of that iron cage, to function more effectively. Drawing on the work of Rollo May, an important book called Power and Innocence, for people who are interested in reading more about this, actually done way back in the early 70s, as I'm recalling it, but still a powerful book, Rollo May, Power and Innocence. He's trying to trace the roots of violence in our culture, and he talks about this sense of powerlessness and says that when we're not powerful, then we lose our sense of self-esteem. And when we lose our sense of self-esteem, then we do a couple of things. We either withdraw or we try to become more assertive. Well, I don't count, I'm not worth much, and, well, I just go off in a shell now, and I won't interact with the world. Well, it's too heavy out there, too much to deal with. Or people become more assertive, and when assertiveness fails, you go through the latest assertiveness training course, and then that doesn't work, then people become what we call aggressive and pushy, and trying to establish themselves in a given situation. We all have dealt with pushy people. And very often we get turned off by that aggressive posture. And then when that doesn't happen, people get angry, and eventually we find people involved in self-destructive behavior. Destructive behavior, some of it turned in on oneself. This might be a way to understand the drug question. No, it's sort of baffling in a way. Why do we have these people destroying their lives through drugs? Well, one way of analyzing that is to say they feel powerless. They can't get a job, they can't make a difference, they can't move forward, and now it's going to come forth in violence. And this violence is turned in on oneself. So it's almost as though they know they're destroying their lives through the use of drugs, but it's better to do it that way than to just suffer through this terrible pain of being no one, of being a cipher. And of course, sometimes it gets turned outwards, and then we get riots and murders and violence. People, again, who need to make a difference. I remember dealing with a young woman who was terribly hurt by her husband in a way she could never forgive him for. She used to just try to force him to hit her. That was her whole mode, sort of existence in life, was force him to hit her, because then at least she was real. And this is how she talked. This isn't my analysis. This is how she was a nothing. He wouldn't talk to her, wouldn't deal with her, wouldn't interact with her. She was treated like dirt. And at least if he hit her, if violence was provoked, then she knew she was alive. She knew she was someone. She was worth hitting. And I think that's an interesting way of understanding, what goes on when we've got this sense of powerlessness. Now, the other thing that I think happens, as a result of this, is that people don't want to talk about power. Don't want to talk about this topic. We'd rather put that into the zone of silence and say that doesn't matter because it is too frightening. It is too much to think that this is the kind of world we live in. I think that, many people were in a situation where it's not possible to get the power. We think of some women in certain organizations and situations, they can't get the power, no matter what they would do. And therefore, some of that becomes rage and anger. And perhaps another way of dealing with it is say, well, I don't care. It doesn't matter. And so one sort of puts the sense of powerlessness aside. Okay, that's my effort to set the problem. As you know, when I deal with these great people, I'm interested in them not just as historical figures or to look at them, but it's always a question of how can they illumine real life for us. That's the reason for studying theology in my mind and doing narrative theology and looking at the great figures to say, how do they help me make sense out of my experience? In this case, the experience of powerlessness. Let me take just a minute or two, as I often do, and ask you to turn to the person next to you and just to react to what I said. And as I usually caution, please don't say that was all dumb, but try to establish a positive mood and find something good in what I was trying to say. We just look at the life and teachings of Mohandas K. Ghandi. And as I look at his life, I'm not going to do a total biography, but I wanted to highlight the incidents in his life where he dealt with powerlessness and the attempt to achieve power. As you might remember, he was born in 1869. And one of his first encounters, I think, with powerlessness was at the age of 13 when he was propelled into an arranged marriage. A woman by the name of Kasturbai, a woman of the same age. And also, it's something that I think he resented the rest of his life. He had nothing to say about it. Of course, that was the culture. Families arranged the marriage, but he didn't like that at all. In fact, I think he spent a lot of his time later on trying to overcome that kind of cultural thing. So here he was, suddenly married, and really not wanting to be in that situation. And then the next time occurred a couple years after he was married. His father was ill, and Mohandas was very big on nursing his father. He had a great care for him. And while he was, his father, finally, when he came to the moment when he was dying, Mohandas was with Kasturbai, having intercourse with her. And as he says it later on in his autobiography called My Experiments with Truth, he says, I was in the grip of lust, and therefore I failed to be with my father at the crucial moment of his death. Again, a sense of powerlessness, that one's passions, that his passions had taken him over. His sexual drive had taken him over and kept him from doing his duty at the precise moment when he should have been with his father. And then, as we know, he went to England and studied law and became a lawyer. And then he went to South Africa, he came back to India, tried to practice law for a couple of years, didn't do well at it at all. There was a business venture, a corporation that wanted some help in South Africa, so he went there. And that's in 1893, he's going on a train to get to where he's supposed to do his job, and he is carrying a first-class ticket. He sits on the first-class part of the train. And a guy comes along and spots him sitting there, an Indian known as a coolie, second-class citizen, and says, you can't ride here, you got to go ride in the van in the back of the train. And Ghandi said, no, I have a ticket, and but they wouldn't listen to him, and they threw him off the train. Here he's sitting there powerless. Can't do anything. He has a ticket and he can't even use it. And he sat there in the train station shivering and through a very cold night. And at that point he vowed that he would do something about it, that he would spend his life, devote himself to public service and especially overcoming racism and the discrimination connected with it. Again, an experience of powerlessness in his life. 1906, he decided to do something about this sexual drive, and so rather in unilateral fashion, without consulting his wife, he decided that he would remain celibate from then on. As he said, it was an attempt to gain power over the sexual drive so that he would be able to function better as a public servant. An interplay again, sense of powerlessness earlier, when he wasn't doing the job as he should have. Erik Erikson, the therapist, psychoanalyst, suggests that part of Gandhi's drive forever after was to care and to nurture, to give himself totally to sort of nursing India and caring for those who were down and out, the kind of care that he had not given to his father at the moment of his death. And then at this point in South Africa, he developed what is known as Satyagraha, with two words put together which mean truth force. In other words, his idea was the way you were going to counter this injustice was through the power of truth. That is the title of the lecture tonight, of course, the power of truth, which enables us to deal with powerlessness. We're going to see how that develops. But he employed that. That's the kind of thing that we have come to know with the civil rights movement in the United States, marches and nonviolent protests, strikes, all of those kind of things to achieve justice. And Gandhi employed that very effectively in South Africa and made certain progress for the coolies, the discriminated group in South Africa. And then he returns to India to take on a much larger task, and here he sees powerlessness again. The whole nation is powerless. It's under the thumb of the British Empire. They don't have the kind of self-rule and the kind of independence that he would like them to have. And then he sees the people are in the same mode, that they've ingested, as the powerless usually do eventually, ingested the symbols of the dominating group. They take on the thought patterns that the dominating group wants them to have. We know that through slavery in our own country. We know that as the feminist movement has made us aware of how that happens in male-female relationships. There's this thing of an excursus here about dating patterns, that when they were studying these, and when the male image is not reinforced by the female in the dating relationship, that the courtship breaks up. It's almost an invariable thing. Whereas if the image that the woman has in that situation is not affirmed or whatever, the relationship still might go on. In other words, we have here this same psychic factor going on where the one group forces, in a sense, the dominant thought patterns and images on the other group. Well, that's how he saw the Indian people, as having taken on a sense of inferiority in relationship to the British. And so what did he try to do about all of this? He tried to get them to be self-sufficient. And one of the great ways he did it was, in sort of a spontaneous gesture, was to say they weren't going to wear British clothing anymore. You know, the British controlled the textile industry, sent the cloth over, then made the clothes, and they controlled the whole thing. So Gandhi said, well, let's not do that. And he got a bunch of people to take off their clothes made in England and to burn them. And he said, we must spin our own cloth. And so the spinning wheel, which Gandhi worked at almost every day for a while, became the symbol of self-sufficiency. We're going to make our own cloth and make our own clothes. Gandhi, as all these great leaders, is a master of symbolism. And in that way, he was able to help the people feel a sense of self-worth. We're not dependent on these other people for such a fundamental thing as our clothing. We can do that ourselves. And then another way where he tried to achieve power. He always saw that the owners and the moneyed people had the power. Now, how were you going to get around that? So he devised other power forces, satyagraha methods. One time he was trying to help out a group of mill workers. They wanted a 35% raise in their pay. And so he became their advocate. And they weren't getting any place, and weeks are going on and nothing, and Ghandi, the workers are getting discouraged. And one time, again, in a spontaneous outburst, Ghandi says suddenly to a group, I'm going to fast unto death until we get this 35%. Well, he fasted for 3 days. The owners gave in, and they went to arbitration, and the workers got what they wanted. Ghandi employed that tactic 16 other times in his life. When he couldn't get done what he wanted done, people wouldn't act reasonably, I'm going to fast till death until we get it done. It became a powerful weapon, a nonviolent weapon, a way to assume power, to get power in a way that didn't have to resort to guns, to violence, and so on. And then there was the Great Salt March in 1930, when, again, attempting to gain independence from Britain, he led the people on a long march, I think 240 miles, and to the sea. And they weren't allowed to make their own salt. The British controlled the salt industry, and they had to pay a heavy tax, and that put a great burden on the poor. And so Ghandi, in a symbolic gesture, after all these thousands of people walking to the sea with him, bent down, waves washed over, and there's some salt there. He picked up the salt. And a symbolic gesture thus broke the law, encouraging his people to take hold for themselves. And all over India, people began then getting their own salt and refusing to pay the tax. As we know, great violence was connected with that. And a lot of people thrown into jail for making their own salt. But Ghandi, again, in a great symbolic gesture that the people could understand, were able to take hold. His great friend Tagore, the poet, Indian poet, said that that was really the end of the British domination. Now, we're making points here about power. You know, that's the point of all of this. Saying something about power. They broke the British domination by walking 240 miles, reaching down and picking up that much salt. Tagore said that at that point, it was all over for Britain. Interesting commentary on this whole question of power. And then the other thing that he was interested in doing is teaching the people fundamental skills like the use of the spinning wheel and so on, so that they could feel worthwhile, so they could have a sense of self-esteem. And as we know, finally in 1947, due largely to the work of this little brown man, as he was called, a whole country achieved independence. An incredible triumph for satyagraha, for truth force, truth power in the world. January 30th, 1948, to complete the story, we know a Hindu extremist, and that's what Ghandi was himself, a Hindu, came up and right before the prayer services at his ashram, or religious community where he lived, came up and point blank shot him. So that's something about the life of Ghandi. And I think, you could stop there in a sense and do a meditation on power. And that ought to tell us something about all that I was saying before, but not being one to just leave the story sit, I'm going to follow through with an analysis. As I'm wont to do. That's the job of theologians, to do my job. So let's look a little bit at his teaching. What did all that mean? What are the methodology that he developed? What was he after? And what was at the basis of it all? Well, you can do this a number of ways. But He said it at various times in life, all I'm interested in doing is pursuing truth. I want to pursue truth. And part of the truth that he wanted to get at was what he called self-realization. He wanted to cut through the illusions that mess up our heads. Get away from the faulty attitudes and thinking that dominate our consciousness and try to get to what he called the true self. This is a great corrective to what we have in the Western world. When we think of what's wrong and what we want to do, we think of ourselves as empty, as not fulfilled, as partial, as incomplete. And so our drive, dominant drive for almost everybody in our country and in the Western world is, I'm going to get fulfillment. I'm going to learn more, or experience more love, or do more things, or accomplish more things because to fill up my emptiness. I'm going to make myself complete. Self-fulfillment is our great ideal. We translate it very often these days, self-actualization. I'm going to take my potential and develop it. Well, Gandhi had another way of looking at what life is all about. What the key to life is, he said, is not self-fulfillment, it's self-realization. Because the problem of life isn't that we're empty, it's that we suffer from illusions. We don't see it right. We don't know who we are and where we fit. We don't know how these relationships are supposed to work. We don't know how we're supposed to fit into society. We got it messed up in our heads. We don't know how we're supposed to relate to the great God. So the problem isn't to get more, to have a competitive world and achieve more. The problem is to cut through the illusions. This means a search for truth, truth about ourselves. But he says as you begin to search for truth, what you find out is that truth is something calling us. It's not just in my own head. Truth has an objective value. There's a large truth that's compelling me, drawing me. And then Gandhi got to the great point where he said, that objective truth is God. Gandhi reversed himself. He didn't say God is truth, as we probably would say in our way of looking at things. But Gandhi said, truth is God. Truth that we seek, the deepest search in our life, that's what God is. That is what we are after. And this God calls us. It's not just it's an inner search, but this God's calling us. And what to? Self-realization and service to the world. To make a contribution, to make this world a little bit better place. But how are we going to do this? How are we going to get this self-realization? It doesn't come automatically. His book is entitled My Experiments with Truth. And he said all of his life, that's what he was doing, experimenting, trying to figure out what made people tick, how you could make the world better, what made himself tick. My experiments with truth. And he said that requires concentration. That requires meditation, reflection, attention to detail, doing our tasks as well as we can in each given situation. That's how you get to self-realization, he says. And what's this going to demand in turn is discipline. Can't do it without discipline. And so Gandhi, had this whole raft of things. On a good day, he ate a few nuts. On other days, he fasted completely. Every kind of discipline you can think of, he was ready to do that, to renounce, to give up. Why? Because that cleared his mind. Because that got rid of all these external cares and so on, so that he could concentrate on this process of self-realization. And what he learned is that you couldn't get this, you couldn't get the truth by violence. You couldn't make it happen. You couldn't get it by coercing people, by manipulating them, make them do it your way. You couldn't do it through force at all. And so he became a great apostle of nonviolence. And that's why he said, let's not take up arms against the British. Let's walk to the sea and pick up a bit of salt. That's how we begin to change consciousness and make things happen non-violently. It's the only way that we're really able to do this. And non-violence, you can only be non-violent in dealing with people if indeed we can identify with them. If we can say, yeah, these other people around, they got feelings like I do. They're sensitive like I am. They can be hurt just like I am. They can be tired. They can celebrate joy just like I am. So he said that's what's key. We have to identify with those. We have to see that one of the great illusions in life is that we are distinct individuals, unconnected. That's one of the greatest illusions of all. The truth is, that we come to see, is it's not like that. We're united. There's a more powerful spirit that pulls us together. We're one. That's part of his Hindu tradition. That separateness, distinctiveness is really an illusion, and therefore competition doesn't really make sense. We end up competing, in a sense, defeating ourselves and not the other people. We said what we need to do as part of the truth is to reduce our ego to zero. Get rid of ego. Become more selfless, more of a servant. If we're able to do that, then we can give ourselves over to helping others, improving the world, to public service, in his case, to liberating a whole country. Now, I've tried to put together for you, a very complicated set of ideas, it seems to me, that we find in Gandhi's thoughts scattered around. But the essence of it is that we are to pursue truth, and truth is power. But it's not power in the way we usually think of it. It's nonviolent power. It's the power of illumination, of undercutting illusion, of coming to know who we are, how we fit, how relationships really work, where we fit in the great cosmic scheme of things. As I suggested, this is such a different way of looking at the world. I mean, you realize that if the world functioned that way, it would look altogether different. We couldn't do that in the United States, could we? We would probably fall apart tomorrow. Well, what would happen in marriages if we suddenly had a cooperative spirit like that? I mean, people wouldn't know how to act. The usual patterns of domination would be, out the window. We get scared. Talking to a person recently, trying to get them into a more adult relationship with very many people, but the person doesn't want to do that. Because why? Because that's unfamiliar. And because it's unfamiliar, it's scary. Because it's scary, one wants to withdraw and say, I don't want to move into that new mode of relating. So Gandhi's critique is radical. It gets at the very basis of criticizing our competitive world, and our dominant patterns of existing with one another. The next point in Gandhi's teaching that I want to get at is what he said is crucial to understanding the Hindu scriptures. One section of the Hindu scriptures we call the Bhagavad Gita. I've talked about that before. It's commonly called the Gita. The Gita is the story of Arjuna. Arjuna has a big problem. He's a warrior, and he's great for fighting. But suddenly, he's facing an army that's composed in part of his kinsfolk. Now, he is perplexed. If he doesn't fight, they're going to come and overwhelm him, and he's going to die. If he does fight, he's going to feel terrible because he's killed his own relatives. So what should he do? Fortunately, he has as his charioteer Krishna, the main avatar or incarnation of God, right there sitting next to him. He's able to call upon Krishna's wisdom, and Krishna tells him, you have to fight. Have to fight. Don't withdraw. But go into battle not caring if you win or lose. That's fundamentally the story of the Bhagavad Gita. Now, Ghandi, being much a product of the 20th century, said, well, much as we do with our scripture stories these days, is you don't want to take that story just literally. It's not a story about war and whether you should enter into war or not. Oh, no. It's a story about the human condition. And as Gandhi says, it gives us the matchless remedy for the problems of the human condition. The matchless remedy. And what is that remedy? What is that secret to life as he saw it and made him tick? It is that we must renounce the fruits of action. We have to act in life, but you can't get hung up on success or failure. You have to put your effort into the means and not the end. You have to plan. You have to decide what you want to accomplish. You've got to look at various methods of accomplishing it. Use your brains. But once you're in action, you have to let go. Renounce. Let it happen. And don't let yourself care whether you win or lose, whether you are a success or a failure. This he saw as the matchless remedy for the human problem. Renounce the fruits of action. We'd go into a lot more detail about how he meant that, but there's two components really. It's not a passivity and say, well, who gives a damn about it? I don't care. If it happens, it happens. It's not that way. It is to be very attentive to detail, very careful in preparing, know the situation, but then once you're in action, you concentrate on the effort and not whether you win or lose. You don't care. You renounce the fruits of the action. Don't worry about the success or failure. Those are the two components in what he thought is the matchless remedy that we need to learn about. Well, again, one begins to sense, what a marvelous idea that is for mental health. To the degree we could do that, we do so much better. I always remember Lou Groza, the place kicker for the Browns. They said, well, how do you handle the stress and going out and have to kick? And he says, all I do is I concentrate on what I have to do. I concentrate on getting my steps right, keeping my eye on the ball and following through. In other words, Lou Groza is not standing there wondering, I wonder if I'm going to make the field goal or not, or getting, as the athletes say, these negative thoughts coming into his head like maybe I'll miss it. That's no part of the thinking. That's blocked out. That's secondary. What counts is I'm going to concentrate on the steps, the action here, and make that happen. But you begin to see, what a difference that would make in the way we function in life. It would keep public speakers from being strident. I once saw a very renowned speaker talking to an audience. The audience wasn't with them. And he kept trying harder and harder to get the audience with him. The harder he tried, the more recalcitrant the group became. And he just came undone before our eyes. I talked to him about it afterwards, tried to commiserate a little bit with him. And it was that thing. He had to win the audience. And if he couldn't, he was undone. The secret, what he could have done at any point, of course, is to let go of that and concentrate on doing what he could do. To do the best of giving the talk. What we can think, don't parents end up having to do this with offspring? There's a wisdom in that, a letting go of the product in a way. Of saying, being able to sit back and say, I did my best, I made the effort, and there it is. We have to live with that now. So Gandhi, as you can see, by renouncing the fruits of action, turned out to be one of the most successful people in all of history, thus liberating a whole country out of this sort of mindset. Trying to judge time here. The next thing I want to do is try to apply all of this to our situation. I kind of think that I can do that in a reasonable... Let's do our one-to-one discussion for a minute, and then I will wind this up, I think. You want to do that? Can't figure this out. My sister's giving me signals. What am I supposed to do, Pat? Wind it up right now? the whole thing.
Power, just power.
I'll see you next week, 7:30. Let's take a short 5-minute break. And again, to open that up for questions. Yeah.
The very thing you brought up where he decided that he was going to no longer have any sexual relations with his wife. He observed the power there that he took away from his wife. Don't you see that as a conflict of this very statement?
Yeah. The question is asked about the unilateral vow of celibacy. I certainly wouldn't want to put Ghandi up as an example of the partnership marriage. Nor would I want to put him up as a model for personal relationships. I mean, if we're looking for that, he's not the place to look. I will tell you that. I mean, Gandhi's relationship with his wife, I think we could put under that category of being very manipulative. There's other stories about how he treated his wife. I mean, there was one time he wanted her to clean out the latrines of the untouchables, the lower class. And he told her not only to do it, but to do it with a smile. And that if she wouldn't do it with a smile, she was gone, like out, finished. He was very strong that way. And he had trouble with his children, too, the same way. He came across as an authoritarian. His oldest son just completely rebelled, became a derelict, and so on. So in the area of personal relationships, I think you could do a pretty good analysis of how he used what we commonly call manipulative power. And it appears as though that's how he interacted. Now, if you want to see a value in what he did, the idea was that he would do these various vows, and that was a big part of his life. Vows were very important to him because they felt that gave him a strength and a conviction that he was going to carry through on it. Was always to free him up for public service. I mean, that's where he's a model. It's important whenever we look at these great people, they all have clay feet. That's what you learn in studying these people. They all got their weak areas. There's no perfect people walking around. And the question is, do we then end up condemning them because they didn't have one segment of their life together? Or do we try to learn from the things they were good at? And you can do it either way. And I don't have any quarrel with somebody who would look at Ghandi. And, I mean, there's severe articles. One guy did an article in Commentary Magazine, just a tremendous hatchet job on Ghandi. And it would be easy to do because he didn't do well at all in a lot of his personal relationships. And you could say, well, look at this. However, my approach, as you can tell, is to look for what's good there and what we might learn. And he's very good on the level of public service. He's very good on the level of truth, power. And he tells us important things. He functions, in my mind, as a corrective for our culture. Not as a saint, but as a corrective person for things that I think we're really messed up on. And the whole competitive and the sense of powerlessness. That's why I chose him, of course, to deal with this problem, because I think he has more to say about it than most anybody you're going to find. But you got your choices with these people. But they all have their weak points, and to me it doesn't vitiate the other good things that he did. And that's what I want to pick up on. I want to learn from him.
You mentioned that for 16 times he brought up the idea of fasting until he died. Was that because he was powerless to do anything else but fast to get his point across?
That's a very good question. The question is asked about, well, why did he do these fasts unto death? And was it because, indeed, he was powerless to accomplish it in any other way? I think the answer to this is that despite what he wrote in his autobiography and the way he painted himself, Ghandi was an extremely pragmatic politician. He knew what he wanted to accomplish, and he went about it. Right? This is Reinhold Niebuhr, the great American theologian's reading of Ghandi. That his words somehow sounded so lofty and spiritual, but when you got down to it, he was going to do what was effective. And I think that he did that and found that that was an effective tool. I think as a lot of other great people, he acted spontaneously. I think a lot of times he didn't figure this out ahead of time, like, wow, how are we going to get this 35% increase? I know what I'll do. I'll fast unto death. It's more like he's addressing the group, and he sees they're down, and they're going to probably give up the strike and go down the tubes here, and he's thinking, well, what am I going to do? And suddenly it comes out. In fact, he talked very often about the inner voice, just as Socrates talked about the daemon that spoke to him. And as many great people have an inner voice, an inner gyroscope. They're very self-directed. Gandhi never had a spiritual director, although he thought everyone should have one. He thought that everyone should have a spiritual director, but he didn't have one. He was like the spiritual director in his own family by the age of 10 or so. I mean, he's like many other great people. They know they're great. They know they're special. And they begin to use that. So I would say that the answer to your question in part is that it came to him, and he would do it sort of out of the inner voice, and it worked. But he had great guilt feelings over it because he thought he was being manipulative towards the owners. He had great reservations about that after he did it. It only took 3 days and they gave in. And he felt, was I manipulative? Maybe I wasn't true to the real principles of satyagraha. So the same way with great people like the rest of us, they have their doubts and wonderings. We sit back and see them, it look like they're in a nice, neat box here, but they had to fight it out on a day-to-day basis, figure out what they were going to do. And so he worried about that. As I wrote in a recent article about him, despite that, he did it 16 more times. He didn't let his guilt feelings keep him from using the tactic again, even though it might be manipulative. Certainly we have that sense that it is, don't we? I mean, it's a way of getting your way. It's another form of power. That's the thing, which becomes clear in Gandhi, is that Gandhi it proves the rule. There's no way to get out of the power game for you or for me or for anybody else. The question is, how do we play that game? What kind of power do we exert? Power is inevitable. Power is inevitable. Parents have power because they set the rules of the game. Up until a certain age, they still try to set the rules of the game, and it doesn't work anymore, but, they do it. Teachers have power because they make up the syllabus. Lecturers have power because they set the frame of the debate. We're going to talk about Ghandi tonight because I'm lecturing on Ghandi. That's the way the world works. And it happens every place. You can be in a small group of 5 people. Sooner or later, someone will take leadership and say, well, let's talk about this. Or, boy, Sam didn't get a chance to talk. What do you think, Sam? It'll happen every place. Somebody will, assume, and other people will be mad because she said, what do you think, Sam? It's always interacting like that. We can't get away from it. So Gandhi did it, I think, out of his spontaneous reactions, which were so often on target, as it is with great people, and he saw that it was effective, and so he used it again. But when he became convinced, and what's at the bottom of all of it is the value of satyagraha, of truth force, of nonviolence, that this is the way to do it. Because if we get our way through violent means in defeating the enemy, then we lose the battle. You don't get any place. That becomes part of his whole outlook here. I think I would take one more question, then try to summarize my own sense of how he shows us what's happening. At least I saw one other hand. Yes?
Well, I just wanted to comment that even though when he fasted, it wasn't manipulative to the body, still he was willing to turn the violence in on himself. And that.
Turn the violence in on himself? What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, because fasting is a form of violence to the
yes.
body. So that in that case, if he's willing to turn the violence in on himself, then in some way, even though he's being manipulated,
could I try to formulate that? Maybe the statement is made that Gandhi turned the violence in on himself. I would maybe try a reformulation of that and say that what he did is take suffering upon himself in order to accomplish things. He was willing to suffer for the cause. And that's part of why he was an effective leader. He thought that all the time, that he had to lead the way. Anything he was going to ask for from his people, he had to be willing to do himself. I think that's a great mark of a leader. I'm just going to pull together what probably is obvious in a way, in the way he responds to the kinds of sense of powerlessness I delineated at the beginning. So first of all, it seems to me that Gandhi functions as a great example of someone who refused to be passive in the world. He took charge of his life. He refused to be merely a victim. He was a coolie. That's like, saying somebody, that's the minority group, they're down. He was a coolie, but he wouldn't think like a coolie. He wouldn't let the dominant culture program his self-perception and his mission in life. And he rose above that. And he did it consciously. He consciously took hold. And I must say that as I deal with people who are suffering, with depression or feeling down and out and feel the victim of the fates, feel the power of this unfair world taking them over, it has always seemed to me that people make progress when they say, no, I'm not a victim. I won't let myself be a victim. I will take charge. I will take hold of my life. I don't have to just be passive here and let others manipulate and control me. And I think Gandhi stands there as a good example. He was a very shy person. When he first got up as a lawyer in court, he could hardly talk, could hardly get any. Now, when we begin to think about ourselves and how we are going to go about all of this, it seems to me what he really moves us to do is to see through the illusions, to be rigorously honest with ourselves, to face up to who we are, to look at the empirical self, the facade, and to try to match that against our ideal or the true self we want to be. He's saying, don't fool yourself. Don't rationalize. Get honest, because that's the only way to get to the truth and to get to reality. So if some part of our life is messed up, we have to be willing to say it. If I can't handle authority, then I have to know that in order if I'm going to make progress. If I have serious doubts about the faith, I have to be in touch with those doubts if I'm going to move forward. I can't walk around fooling myself, pretending that things are all right when they're not. Rollo May talks about that as the sort of trap of false innocence. I'm going to be innocent. I'm going to walk through life sort of not probing any deeper into who I am or what I am all about. And I suppose after we cut through the illusions, and everyone would have, that's a very personal thing. I mean, what are they for any individual? I had, someone said, well, I have manipulative tendencies. It's clear to me. Every time I'm in a relationship, I got an agenda. And the agenda doesn't go my way, then I'm upset. So I have to know that. So maybe what someone would say is, hey, I'm going to try to command a relationship without an agenda. I'm actually going to talk in an open way and say, well, where are we going to go with this thing? Example of cutting through the illusions. Then the next thing is the great importance of discipline, which is very out in our culture, of course. And I want to say that that's just gets in your way. As someone told me at the break, well, didn't those disciplines involve withdrawal? Doesn't that mean you're sort of putting yourself down and reducing, your ego to nothingness, as I said? And doesn't that cut into your effectiveness? And of course, what Gandhi believed, and I think demonstrated in his life, is that discipline liberates us to act, to accomplish, to do, because it gets rid of the obstacles that keep us from functioning in a fully effective way. And I think the other thing that I get from Gandhi is that I believe is true is that discipline sort of comes as a package. Many people experience this, that if one element of one's discipline falls apart, it's very likely that the rest of it's going to go down as well. It seems as though, and I think the psychological reason that happens is because we disappoint ourselves and we say, hey, here I had, I thought I was going to really get my exercise every day, and then I didn't do it, and therefore I feel bad and guilty, and therefore because I'm bad, I feel guilty, I'm depressed, and therefore, well, who cares about the 15 minutes of prayer I was going to do? I'm not worthy to pray anyway. God's probably going to punish me. We're not jumping rope today. So we begin to get that sort of downward cycle here. So what he's suggesting, it seems to me, is a whole habit of being a disciplined person. And of course he says the great important thing is to do this voluntarily. He did the vows. He said vows imposed on people are probably no good. Like the vow of celibacy, if you want to say that for the priest. I mean, this idea, that would just get in your way. No, it's altogether different. It's like night and day. It's a different ball game to voluntarily take on the vow of celibacy in order to be a more effective public servant. So the key for him to the vow was that you decide, and not that it's imposed by somebody else. Then let's look at this business of the interaction with others and how we were overcoming the sense of powerlessness here. And I think that we have to start out with a realistic appraisal that there will be inequities in relationships. I mean, I don't care what we do tomorrow, males are going to make more money than females in marriages. I mean, what are we going to do? I mean, we'd like to get to equity, but we're not going to have that now, so people got to figure out what to do with that now. Now, the destructive thing that seems to me to happen is based on the notion of competition. If the relationship is thought of, if the power is thought of in competitive terms, then the one who is lower in any scale you want to use will always feel disadvantaged, will always feel put down, always feel inferior. There's no way to do it. That person might strive to get up or to pull the other person down so they can be equal, but as long as it's a competitive situation, we can't do anything about it. So it seems to me that what is called for here is a change of attitude that says, hey, we're not in competition. Remember? We're here in a basis of mutuality. And we each have our way to contribute to the well-being of the relationship. We contribute out of our own abilities, our own capacities, and everyone's got something different to contribute. So I don't see any solution to the relationship questions apart from getting rid of the competitive mode that predominates now and is sort of foisted upon us in the culture as a whole. So that, maybe we begin right at an early age with kids of saying, this kid is not competing, my one daughter here is not competing against my son in terms of who's smarter or who gets better grades or something. I noticed that about my mother. Whenever one of her kids got complimented, she almost always responded about the other ones and saying, well, they're each different. They got their own way. Now that, to hear that over and over, then you get a proper sense of individuality, it seems to me. And it breaks down the competitive mode. And I presume we could do that in a lot of different ways in family life and in other situations as well. So we're looking for what Gandhi, I think, would call upon us to do is to come at it with a more cooperative mode, but the key to it would be renounce the fruits of action. I mean, give up the fact that you have to make more money than somebody else. Don't worry or that person is more successful than somebody else in any endeavor. Because as soon as we're into that, it's a trap. I see no way out of it at that point, except to attack it at the root and to say we renounce these fruits of action, or in our language, don't get hung up on the success, the achievement, and make that the only measure of worth. That's what we get in our competitive economic society. And Gandhi is, therefore I say, is giving us, I think, a radical critique here. We don't have to win. We don't have to be number one. In fact, we're not really competing, and we can all contribute. The second thing in the relationship with others is not to let ourselves get subtly drawn into manipulative situations of responding. The other person wants to manipulate. The other person wants to control the agenda. So our response then is, well, I'll control it back. I'll do it better. I'll control the agenda. I'll make it happen. And then we get the big fights going on. Then we get the power struggle in the relationship. We get that in how we deal with the kids here. Do I get my way of raising the kids or my spouse? So I find my own way to get the kids to think my way. Where it seems to me that again is a trap, that then we just become part of the problem and not the solution. It's like, I won't fight that way. I refuse to fight, to play the game that way. You might have to play it that way, and that's your style. I might have to challenge it, but I won't play by those rules. I won't get drawn into that web of exploitation and manipulation. In my own sense of life is that we sort of walk through our day constantly being tempted to be drawn into that web. And that one has to sort of consciously pull oneself out of it and say, no, I won't play by those rules. I will play in a more straightforward and honest kind of way, or at least try to do it. Societal responses, Gandhi very clear here. Self-realization for him is not a private matter. He didn't think you accomplished this, as some in the East do, by going off to a monastery and meditating all day. You notice that while he was big on getting to know yourself, it wasn't a private sort of effort. It was done for the purpose of public service. His mysticism played into his prophetic stance, his prayer life, and he was mostly a public prayer life, incidentally. He loved to pray in the ashram with a lot of people, much more so than just praying by himself. But that sort of self-realization, coming close to himself for him, moved him to involvement in improving society. And I think, again, if we want the world to work better, we've got to be willing to change that. It's not enough just to change hearts. And a lot of people think that way, and fine, they go about changing their own heart and two other people, and that helps the world. But somebody has to attend to the structures. Well, somebody has to be interested in how we overcome the exploitation and manipulation that's built into the institutions and into the society. Somebody's got to try to get equal pay for women in the society. Otherwise, we would just keep going year after year in marriages where we get people feeling powerless and then resorting to various self-destructive behaviors because they're upset about it. No other solution except some sort of larger societal movement forward. Gandhi challenges us to do it intelligently, to work with others, to plan strategies well, and so on. And finally, there is the attempt to deal with cosmic powerlessness. And what Gandhi tells us here is, with his truth is God ideas, that what we seek is ultimately on our side and not over against us. Augustine had that same idea. The truth is within us. The truth is the source of our power. It's not, like Sartre thought, that the God can only overpower us and take away our freedom, keep us from doing what we want, make us feel guilty. Gandhi reversed that by starting out with what it is we search for. Truth is our good. Truth is our salvation. It is our liberation. It's our way to self-realization. It's the way we overcome illusion, the way we become our better self. It's the way we make a difference in the world. And that power, which is obviously in our best interest and on our side, we name God. He's very contemporary in that. He's very much like my own mentor, Karl Rahner, who says the mystery that surrounds us and is part of us, we name God. For Gandhi, the truth that we seek is the very God who runs the world. This God is not a competitor. This God is not, trying to keep us in a subservient position. This God wants us to know ourselves better, overcome illusion, and to move forward. So, what have we tried to do? Tried to look at what I think is a really big problem today, a sense that we're a cog in the wheel. There's powers at work that we don't manipulate and control, and we begin to feel like a faceless other, as Auden said. And Gandhi is interesting to think about in that regard. 20th century figure, a holy man in the Hindu tradition, holy man, an activist, and one who found a way to be effective in the world. And the trick for him was truth power. Power of truth to free us and to help us to live in better fashion. Then I think we turn that back on ourselves. We perhaps figure out ways in which we can overcome the sense of powerlessness without becoming violent, without becoming manipulative, but by doing it in a cooperative mode and with a sense of mutuality. Now, let's see what kind of questions that produces, or comments, or reactions of any sort.
Jeff, first of all, I'd like to congratulate you on your reflections Sunday evening, Thomas Murray.
Oh, thank you.
That was very insightful.
Good. I think I'll have them on again.
All tied down with this truth power thing. Your friend Tom took the time to learn the Russian language, go over there and live and be with the people and converse with them and live with them, and we just all want to find out the power of truth.
Yeah.
And your discussion Sunday evening gave me such a different insight in the Soviet American Rome. That's the power of truth.
Well, Larry is talking about Reflections, Sunday night radio program with Tom Murray, who happens to be running for Congress in the 5th District. And we were talking about U.S.-Soviet relations, which is one of his specialties. And I mean, it's true. The interesting thing about it is it's a perfect example of where myth reigns supreme. Of where, much of what we get in the media and so on, has painted a picture of the Soviet Union as that satanic force. And when we begin to think of that as this demonic empire, well, it's hard to pierce through it and to see, anything else about it, to get a more nuanced view of it. And I think the people who have bothered to study or to know a question then seem like they open up new vistas for us. I remember how surprised I was to hear of how lively the church action is in the major cities, how many people attend churches. In one sense it doesn't surprise you because people are religious creatures and sooner or later that comes out. Or to know the diversity in the Soviet Union, the great Muslim centers that are in the Soviet Union. Well, it begins to give one a sense that you can't get at by just saying they are a satanic empire. Then you don't have any basis for cutting through it. So I think that's a good example of societal myths. The other one that comes to mind is, about welfare chiefs. You can repeat that so often. We got all these people on welfare who drive around in Cadillacs. And you hear that often enough. It's repeated in the barber shop and every place you are. And before long people believe that, and they don't know facts that, over 95% of the people on welfare can't work if they wanted to. Because they're children, or blind, or disabled, or too old. All of that. The facts or knowledge, is what needed to cut through the myths. And I think that's what self-realization is about. It's not just going within, in Gandhi's mind, but it is to realize the truth about the world in which we live. Anyway, Larry, thanks for the bit about the radio program. And I hope you're able to build back your business after the fire.
We've got lots of friends and lots of hope and lots of truth.
Good faith that you and Sherry have. Wish you well. question of the victim and losing the sense of injustice in the system. You want to say, how does that play out for you?
Well, my thought is that we can often feel such a victim that we lose perspective and don't make a real rational judgment on what is right and wrong.
Within the institution, yeah. Well, I think anytime we feel victimized or merely a victim, we don't see the whole. I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, you get tunnel vision then. All you think is I'm being put upon. You know, everyone's out to get me. You know, the world is out to get me in a sense, especially this institution I belong. And I don't see any way to rise above it except to get beyond the feeling that I'm a victim. That doesn't mean I'm not, suffering, or that I'm not controlled, or that the institution isn't always just, but that, I'm more than that. I can rise above that in some sense. And therefore, then I'm in a position to make a more careful judgment, it seems to me. And I must say, if I'm doing therapy with somebody like that, say with a collegian who feels as though they're nothing but a victim of parental power, well, one of the ways I would try to get around it is to look at the relationship more carefully and say, is that totally true? Yes, your parents are strict in this way or domineering in this way, but maybe there's some other area here where there is more of a sense of mutuality, where they listen to you, or you've got certain freedoms, etc. And so, there's a sort of twofold thing going on, it seems to me, in therapy. That is, one is trying to gain a greater sense of self-confidence that I'm not just a victim, but on the other hand, we're trying to look and see if the reality matches that. So if I can show the collegian, well, it's not the whole story about your family life. You're seeing one side of it, and you're really bug on that, but there's more to it, and when you see that, look at there's other ways in which you are not a victim. You're a participant in the family life. They say, oh, yeah, I never thought of that. And then maybe we can begin to make some progress. Now, it seems to me when we begin to look at the large institutions like, government and university and church and so on, you got to start out with the viewpoint, I think, that these institutions are ambivalent. They cut two ways. There's positive and negative. And, that's always been my clue as to how to analyze these things, because it's so simple to just start out and say it's all negative. It's sort of easy to do, and you could just stop there. I felt trapped to that myself with the American civil religion. You probably heard me lecture on that years ago. I was almost totally negative on the American civil religion. And I forgot a key point. That is that every phenomenon, every institution, every religious phenomenon is ambivalent. Therefore, there must have been something good about it. And I couldn't see it. Now I think when I lecture on that, I see the way we could mobilize it for good. I've learned that mostly from Martin Luther King, the way he did it. The American dream and its power. So I would like to talk to the victims in terms of trying to make a more careful judgment about the institution in which you live. And then I think the next thing is not just make judgment, then we have to work to make change. One of the great ways to get beyond being a victim is to achieve power. To achieve a power to make a difference. So the collegian might well achieve the power vis-a-vis the parent by going to the parent and saying, I'm 21 years old now, please don't treat me like a little girl. That we have to begin to relate on a new basis now. And let's talk about this, let's figure out how we're going to go about this. Now, maybe in that one act of self-assertion, one learns that one doesn't have to be a victim. One act of self-assertion. One time when a Catholic layperson would speak up to a priest and say something probably is the freeing act. The freeing act. Then one is free from then on, in one sense. You got the power. You know that it's possible to do that. Except if you get your head bit off and withdraw again. And those terrible clergy persons. But is that on the point?
I think it's really important, too, that on that role, so many times the victim role is countered with that false innocence role. And that makes the victim's role even harder to bear when you know
combination of the two ideas of being victim and false innocence, as I was describing it. And I think I agree with the comment that the two do go together. And I linked it, in my own mind with the fact that powerlessness is so hard to deal with that one, wants to be innocent of the whole power game. That, one wants to say, well, let's live in a non-competitive society. Let's live in a world in which there won't be inequities. We'll no longer grade people, for example. We won't have some people get A, B, C. No, we won't. Competition is bad. There's no power. I don't want any leader. I don't want any teacher giving out the syllabus in this course. I remember going through that in experimental classes years ago. Students are outraged because I handed out a syllabus. And the one guy refused it. He couldn't believe this, that we didn't dialogue about the syllabus. It's a very clear memory in my mind. He couldn't believe that I could be that authoritarian. Well, anyway, it seems to me to move in that direction is part of this false innocence, is to say that, the world, just deny how the world really is. There are some people are teachers, and some people are leaders, presidents, and other people do other jobs. So I think that we won't get out of being victims until we recognize what's really going on. Women won't make progress until they realize that they have to have political power. They have to have economic power. They have to figure out how to elect candidates and so on. We saw this with ERA. How close it was to get ERA if there was, needed to elect more people who saw the world in the way that now did, for example. Anyway, that's part of realism. And I think the power is one of those things that in certain circles people don't want to talk about. That's the innocence, as though that's a taboo topic. Something like money. Sure.
I can follow you in that section you talking about letting go of the use of that. I can follow that in interpersonal and family matters.
Well, I think that Ghandi, again, is the perfect example. Supposedly his attitude was that when he led the Great Salt March, that he was going to lead a salt march and do the symbolic action. And if it didn't work, that he wouldn't be destroyed. He wouldn't be undercut. He wouldn't fall into paralysis because this didn't work. In fact, he did that on occasion. Some of the first nonviolent things that he tried to lead led to violence. He called one of them a Himalayan mistake. That the people weren't ready for it. It was a monumental mistake that he made. The people weren't ready, and he called it off after a couple days, nationwide strike, and said we're going to fast instead, repentance for violence. It's an attitude that one brings to it. I don't think that it matters when you begin to escalate it. I could say in a family situation, I'm going to, not get bent out of shape if people don't do things my way. I could raise it up to this sort of situation and say, I'm going to give the best lecture that I can give, and if my sister falls asleep, I can't help it. She's tired. Just took her oral exam. She's distraught or something. No, but I let go. I can let go of it at this level. I could be given a talk to 1,000 people and let go of it if I had my head straight. And it seems to me the same way. A man could run for Congress and put $500,000 into it. And the question is, on the day he loses, will he give up the fight for social justice, or will he keep going and find another avenue to try to make the world better? I think that would be my test of what happens after it doesn't go our way, after there's failure. then do we bag it, forget it? Are we destroyed? Do we think we're no good? Do we put ourselves down? Or do we move to the next operation? Do we look for the next way to go about it? I think, first of all, I'd say this. In my opinion, there's no way for us in the Western world, as much as we're enculturated, to take on Gandhi's outlook completely. I mean, that's just impossible in my mind. We live in such a competitive world. We're so trained in those modes that to substitute self-realization for self-fulfillment to begin with, and to say adopt a posture of renounce the fruits of action completely, I just don't think it's possible. What does seem possible for me is to hear it as a corrective and to say, hey, you're overly competitive. Cool it a little. No? Or to say to somebody, look, okay, it bothers you a little bit that your husband makes more money than you do, but it's okay. Let's rise above it. That's what seems possible to me in hearing Gandhi's message. And I think it goes the same way at any sort of societal level. So we're going to work hard to achieve, a better housing situation in Toledo. And people are going to work at it and do their best at it. And some, as we know historically, some of it goes down the drain. And the question is, does that mean, well, forget it. I don't care about justice anymore. I'm not going to work anymore. It's not worth it. And so on. Forget it. Leave it to somebody else. The institution's corrupt. You can't do anything about it. That, to me, would say that one was hung up on the fruits of action. And whereas it would seem possible to adopt another stance and say, okay, it didn't work. I tried my best. I go to bed at night and get a good night's sleep and put it before the Lord, said, I made a decent effort, Lord. Went down the tubes. And to feel good about that. I mean, it's possible. I mean, you see that in the world of athletics. Sometimes people will make a good effort and they'll, instead of being just totally undone by the defeat, they'll be able to say, hey, best effort we could make. Hold our heads up. I think it's got that kind of flavor. I think we can do it in the political world as well. It's a general attitude, I think, that translates. I say, what is your next move after defeat? That's the way I would judge whether you got your head somewhat together. I think we're going to take just 5 more minutes so that people know how to judge their time. Yeah, Mike?
This really is a quick comment rather than a question.
Speak loudly, Mike.
Okay, when you talk about the sense of powerlessness in our culture today, it seems to me one of the contributing factors and one of the largest contributing factors is rapid change. You've heard me say this before. I think the image that comes to me is what an Air Force lieutenant said to me once, that they have 2 major types of planes in the Air Force: experimental and obsolete. And a lot of people feel that, and have those feelings, I think, about rapid change in our culture today. Buying a computer today is a very, very difficult thing because of the variety of choices that we have, the complexity of the whole thing, and the fact that things, by the time you buy your computer, it's already obsolete. There's a better one. And it seems to me that that's, as far as the sense of our own sense of powerlessness in our culture, that's one of the biggest contributing factors.
I'm hoping everyone heard that because it's a very helpful comment. In essence, it is that why do we end up feeling powerless in our culture? And that is because of the rapid change that we're undergoing. Things feel less stable or manageable. That, of course, was detailed for us in the book Future Shock, among other places, that what that does to the psyche to be involved in these continual changes that occur. And again, I guess that if we're looking for some sort of response to that, I think that it gets back to the fundamental attitudes and perspectives that we have. I would think of that in terms of the cosmic powerlessness. And it seems to me the response and what we hang on to is a belief system. You know, belief that God is in charge of the process. And that ultimately the process can be trusted, no matter how rapidly it's moving at any point. The rapidity of it does not really undercut the question of whether it's trustworthy or not. And that's where I would like to move in terms of how we get hold of that. It's finally a question of faith, it seems to me.
Along with when you make the statements about the national security, I need to get clarification. Isn't the pursuit of positive outcome the reason for putting your heart and all your into the details only to those who needs? And there's no sense, it doesn't come to me that someone would do that to fail. Yeah, the fail, you know, if you do prove a failure, that's not the outcome. That's the outcome. Success would be the outcome. Failure is not the outcome. It's not a building block. You know, of course, a positive outcome, of course, success, of course, the mind, of course, the ends, the fruits.
Again, I'll try to summarize. He's on the question of renouncing the fruits of action as the matchless remedy. And the suggestion is that don't you have to be concerned about the outcome to put in real effort on the means? No. And I agree. I think you're on to what in Gandhi's thought is a very subtle point, and he addresses that rather directly. You do have to know in his mind what you want to accomplish. You have to know what your goal is. And you have to be able to make good judgments about precisely which means will get you there. Well, that's very true. And the goal has to be something that you consider to be worthwhile. Like the independence of India. Well, he was very clear what he wanted when he got back. He wanted the independence of his country. And everything he did fed into that. All the tactical moves he made were ultimately designed to get that. And I think the telling point is he achieved it, which is, you know, unprecedented as far as I know historically. No group voluntarily gives up power. Anyway, but the trick in what he wants us to see, you know, we're all in tune with that. But what he's asking for is an attitudinal change. It's not like you're courting failure, like you're doing all this thinking, yeah, this will probably fail. Probably won't work. It's not that. It's not like, you know, it's not like I don't know what I want to accomplish and means will be haphazard. It's the fundamental attitude that we have that says, I won't let that, whatever the outcome, take me over too much. I won't let the joy and the victory do the same thing to me, like mess up my head. I remember making that mistake once when I in my life hit a home run or something and taunting the opposing pitcher. And, the next time I came to the plate, rueing that I ever did that. I mean, it's I remember being so thrilled at this unlikely happening that I got carried away. I remember clearly being carried away with the success of the moment and therefore doing something really stupid that would hurt in the long run in the game. So, I mean, I think it cuts both ways. It's the attitude we take both towards success and failure that he thinks is the key. So, you know, you want to work hard you want to get an A in the course, you're going to work hard, you're going to read the assignments, do all of that. But, and if you get the A, then how do you respond to that? You know, either whoopee, I don't have to study again in the next course, you know, I got this grade point average knock or something. Or you get the B and then come unglued. Say the old educational system is corrupt, I've been cheated. The way I would judge it is how we react to the success or failure, whether we've achieved what he wants us to achieve. And of course, the secret of him is to get the attitude ahead of time. If you got it right ahead of time, then you'll react well to whatever happens. I hope that clarifies the essential point in understanding Gandhi. What do you think? Last question. Anybody who didn't have a chance yet? Last one. Virginia?
I didn't realize his first name was
Mohandas,
Mohandas.
yes.
His son is Mahatma.
Well, no, Mahatma is a title. You know, like Christ would be not a guy's name, but a title. Mahatma means the great souled one. That was given to him by a good friend of his, and it was either a fellow by the name of Andrews or the poet Tagore, I think it was Tagore, who dubbed him that. Gandhi always hated it. And that's what you always heard, Mahatma Gandhi. People thought that was his name. You know, I mean, that's right. You know, like we think Jesus Christ was his last name or something. As a matter of fact, Christ is a title. It means the anointed one or the Messiah. So it's the same way with Mahatma. It's a title that was given to him by friends and was commonly picked up by the people as a whole as a term of honor for him. Great souled one. I think it fit. And but as I say, he didn't like it. He thought it was overblown. He should have kept a spirit of humility was a very important virtue for him. And I think he thought that cut into the proper humility. I'm going to wind up now and remind you, I'd like to invite you all to come back next week, Tuesday, same time, same place. We'll talk about power again, but from the other side, the way we exercise power ourselves, and look at Martin Luther King and the power of love to guide us in